Hi and welcome. We're going to discuss today in this mini course history and scope of toxicology. This is all based on the Toxicology Bible, and this is chapter 1. So what we're going to cover today is the history of toxicology, starting in antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Age of Enlightenment, and then modern toxicology and toxicology after World War II. The key points are: 1, toxicology is the study of the adverse effects, or AEs, of xenobiotics on living systems. Number 2, toxicology assimilates knowledge and techniques from biochemistry, biology, chemistry, genetics, mathematics, medicine, pharmacology, physiology, and physics. And number 3, toxicology applies safety evaluation and risk assessment to the discipline. History. Modern toxicology extends beyond the study of adverse effects of exogenous agents by assimilating knowledge and techniques from many branches of biochemistry, biology, chemistry, genetics, mathematics, medicine, pharmacology, physiology, and physics, and applies safety evaluation and risk assessment to the discipline. In all branches of toxicology, scientists explore the mechanisms by which chemicals produce adverse effects in biological systems. Beginning in antiquity, knowledge of animal venoms and plant extracts for hunting, warfare, and assassination almost certainly predated recorded history. One of the oldest known writings, the Ebers Papyrus, which is from 1500 BC, contains information pertaining to many recognized poisons, including hemlock, opium, metals such as lead, copper, and antimony. The Book of Job, 1400 BC, speaks of poison arrows in Job 6:4, and Hippocrates in 400 BC added a number of poisons and clinical toxicology principles pertaining to bioavailability and therapy and overdosage. One of the students of Aristotle also included numerous references to poisoned plants. A Greek physician in the court of the Roman Emperor Nero made the first attempt at classifying poisons into plant, animal, or mineral poisons. Legend tells us of a Roman king who was so fearful of poisons that he regularly ingested a mixture of 36 ingredients to protect himself against assassination. On the occasion of his imminent capture by enemies, his attempts to kill himself with poison failed because of his successful antidote concoction, and he was forced to use a sword held by a servant. In the Lex Cornelia, 82 BC, which appears to be the first law against poisoning, later became a regulatory statute directed at careless dispensers of drugs. Come bitter pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love, O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick, thus with a kiss I die. Maimonides, 1135 to 1204, discussed the treatment of poisonings from insects, snakes, and even mad dogs in Poisons and Their Antidotes, published in 1198. Maimonides described the subject of bioavailability as well, noting that milk, butter, and cream could delay intestinal absorption. In the early Renaissance, under the guise of delivering food to the sick and poor, Catherine de Medici tested toxic concoctions, carefully noting the rapidity of the toxic response or the onset of action, the effectiveness of the compound or the potency, and the degree of response of different parts of the body, which is also, in modern times considered specificity and the site of action. The complaints of the victim were also considered clinical signs and symptoms. So then we enter the age of enlightenment. According to Paracelsus, all substances are poisons. There is none which is not a poison. It's the right dose that differentiates a poison from a remedy. Paracelsus 1493 to 1541 was pivotal, standing between the philosophy and magic of classical antiquity and the philosophy and science that willed to us by the figures of the 17th and 18th centuries. Paracelsus, a physician alchemist, formulated many revolutionary views that remain integral to the structure of toxicology, pharmacology, and therapeutics today. He focused on the primary toxic agent as a chemical entity and held that 1, experimentation is essential in the examination of responses to chemicals. 2, one should make a distinction between the therapeutic and toxic properties of chemicals. 3, these properties are sometimes but not always indistinguishable except by dose. And 4, one can ascertain a degree of specificity of the chemicals and their therapeutic or toxic effects. These principles led Paracelsus to articulate the dose-response relationship. Although Ellenbog in 1480 warned of the toxicity of mercury and lead from goldsmithing, there was another short work on mining diseases published in 1556. The major work on the subject, On the Miner's Sickness and Other Diseases of Miners, published in 1567, was published by Paracelsus. That publication addressed the issue of miners' diseases along with treatment and prevention strategies. Occupational toxicology was advanced by the work of Ramazzini when he published in 1700 the Discourse on the Diseases of Workers. And this publication expanded on those previous ones by also including occupational hazards from miners to midwives, including printers, weavers, and even potters. Potts, in 1775, recognition of the role of soot in scrotal cancer among chimney sweeps was the first report of polyaromatic hydrocarbon carcinogenicity. So this is well known now. We know about the polyaromatic hydrocarbons causing cancer. And they've known this as early as the late 1700s. So those findings led to improved medical practices, mostly preventative strategies. Experimental toxicology accompanied the growth of organic chemistry and developed rapidly during the 19th century. Major groundwork in experimental toxicology came out that led to more research in pharmacology, experimental therapeutics, and occupational toxicology. Orfila, a Spanish physician in the French court, used autopsy material and chemical analysis systematically to provide legal proof of poisoning. His introduction of this detailed type of analysis survives as the underpinning of modern forensic toxicology. In 1815, Orfila published a major work devoted expressly to the toxicity of natural agents. Another physician and experimental physiologist studied the mechanisms of action of other poisons like strychnine. His research determined the absorption and distribution of those compounds throughout the body. And some of that researcher's more famous students, like Claude Bernard, contributed the classic publication and introduction to the study of experimental medicine. Some other German scientists, Schmiedelberg and Levin in 1850 to 1929, made many contributions to the science of toxicology, trained hundreds of students who later populated the most important laboratories of pharmacology and toxicology throughout the world. Levin published most of the early work on the toxicity of narcotics, methanol, glycerol, acrolein, and chloroform. Modern toxicology. Toxicology evolved rapidly during the 20th century. Toxicology calls on almost all the basic sciences to test its hypotheses. This fact coupled with the health and occupational regulations that have driven toxicology research since 1900, has made the discipline exceptional in the history of science. Modern toxicology has drawn strength and diversity from its proclivity for borrowing. With the advent of anesthetics and disinfectants in the late 1850s, toxicology, as it is currently understood, began. The prevalent use of patent medications led to several incidences of poisonings from those medications. That, coupled with the response to Sinclair's expose on the meatpacking industry in his publication called The Jungle, led to the passage of the Wiley Bill in 1906, which was the first of many U.S. pure food and drug laws. During the 1890s and early 1900s, the discovery of radioactivity and vitamins, which were then referred to as vital amines, led to the use of the first large-scale bioassays or multiple animal studies to determine whether those new chemicals were beneficial or harmful to laboratory animals. One of the first journals expressly dedicated to experimental toxicology came out. It was published in Europe in 1930 and still exists today. In the same year, the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, was established in the United States. As a response to the tragic consequences of acute kidney failure after the taking of sulfanilamide in glycol solutions, the Copeland Bill was passed into law in 1938. This was the second major bill involving the formation of U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. The U.S. Major Pesticide Act was signed into law in 1947. The significance of the initial Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act was that for the first time in U.S. history, a substance that was neither drug or food had to be shown to be safe and effective. After World War II. Arnold Lehman in 1955 said, "You too can be a toxicologist in 2 easy lessons, each of 10 years." The mid-1950s witnessed the strengthening of the FDA's commitment to toxicology. The U.S. Congress passed, and the President of the United States signed, the Additives Amendment to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. The Delaney Clause in 1958 of these amendments stated broadly that any chemical found to be carcinogenic in laboratory animals or humans could not be added to the food supply. Delaney became a battle cry for many groups and resulted in the inclusion at a new level of biostatisticians and other mathematical modelers in the field of toxicology. Shortly after the Delaney Clause, the first American journal dedicated to toxicology came out. It's called Toxicology and Applied Pharmacology. The founding of the Society of Toxicology, or SOT, occurred very shortly thereafter. The 1960s began with the tragic thalidomide incident. So thalidomide was a drug that was given to pregnant women to help with morning sickness. It caused very severe birth defects if it was ingested at a certain time of fetal development that was critical. Several thousand children were born with very serious birth defects, very, very serious malformations, like missing limbs and things like that. It was a horrible thing. The publication of Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring came out in 1962. Attempts to understand the effects of chemicals on the embryo and fetus and on the environment as a whole gained momentum. New legislation was passed and the journals were founded. Cellular and molecular toxicology developed as a subdiscipline. And risk assessment became a major product of toxicological investigations. Currently, many dozens of professional, governmental, and other scientific organizations with thousands of members and over 120 journals are dedicated to toxicology and related disciplines. In addition, the International Congress of Toxicology, which is made up of toxicology societies from Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, and Australia, bring together the broadest representation of toxicologists. Toxicology has an interesting and varied history, perhaps as a science that has grown and prospered by borrowing from many other disciplines. It has suffered from the absence of a single goal. However, its diversity has allowed the intersection of ideas, concepts from higher education, industry, and government. This has resulted in an exciting, innovative, and diversified field that is serving science and the community at large. Few disciplines can point to both basic sciences and direct applications at the same time. Toxicology, the study of adverse effects of xenobiotics, may be unique in this regard.